Everybody. Thank you for joining today. I'm really excited to be back speaking with all of you. Today we're going to be talking about the FCC's latest proposal for its customer service, offshore customer service rules. So a little bit about me. My name is Susan Duarte. Spent most of my career working inside companies, supporting wonderful organizations like yourself. Right now I'm at Wamba Bond Dixon. I practice in the area of telecommunications, data privacy, artificial intelligence, and consumer protection. I represent clients before the FCC and the FTC, and I'm really happy to be here today. So today we're going to be talking about the FCC's, customer service, NPRM. So an NPRM is a notice of proposed rulemaking. Simply what it means is an invitation to the public to provide comments on rules or proposals that an administrative agency like the Federal Communications Commission is putting out before they actually publish the rules. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what they're proposing and a little bit about how I think it might impact your operations. And I tried to give you some examples, and I hope you'll make it interactive with me. And then just some practical things that you may consider as you follow along with this proceeding. It's still, there are no rules yet. So just a little bit of background. You may be wondering, why is the FCC, why do they have such interest in this? The FCC is responding to, at least what it says in its NPRM, is that it's responding to lots of feedback from consumers through complaints and other data that it's received that there's many issues with customer service. It has looked at a lot of what it calls recent, although it's from 2024, that shows that there's low customer satisfaction scores across the industry, with customers reporting more and more frustration to regulators. And one of the other issues that they identify is that over the last 40 some years, companies have started to move their call centers offshore or outsource them to third parties. And while this approach may have lowered costs from the FCC's perspective, it's caused the loss of American jobs and has contributed to complaints. And I just want to stop for a second and just let you know I'm relaying what's in this document. None of these are necessarily my opinions, just so don't shoot the messenger. But some of the things that they've identified are language and cultural barriers. So they say that a lot of the call center agents lack proficiency in American Standard English and may not fully grasp US cultural norms. They're also concerned that many representatives seem to struggle with more complex issues and can be disconnected from customers. And another issue that they've identified are data security and fraud concerns. And that has become what they say a matter of national security. And then another thing, just there's legislation now that's been proposed, and you may have heard of it, of the Keep Call Centers in America Act that came out from Congress. And really what that is just a disclosure of where the agent is located and the option for the caller to be transferred back to the United States. And then there's also activity around the noble pursuit of trying to reduce robocalls. So that's sort of where all of these things are coming from a regulatory perspective. So this proceeding is very interesting because it directly will impact those that are regulated by the FCC. And that includes telecom, wireless, cable, and broadband providers. But the FCC seems to be suggesting in the NPRM that it's looking to expand its scope. So it's looking at organizations using offshore, nearshore, outsourced call centers when serving regulated industries. So in other words, if you're serving someone in the directly regulated providers, you may be subject to the requirements. Again, there are no set rules. Again, vendors and partners may be impacted, and they're also taking a really strong look at non-telecom companies. And one of their rationales is companies all use US resource of phone numbers. And so that might draw them into the rules that the FCC is contemplating. The FCC makes it very clear that they're not just evaluating the phone channel. They're also looking at this for text, SMS, your online chat, and any emails. So what exactly are they up to? What are they proposing exactly? So we'll go into each one in more detail as this discussion goes on. But the first proposal they're looking at is requiring mandatory American English standard for agents. And they're even asking if they should have testing requirements to show a level of proficiency beyond a technical level. So in other words, do they understand idioms? Do they understand the culture? Other things would be data security requirement proposals, also imposing caps on how many calls can be handled offshore by foreign centers. As I mentioned during the beginning, they want to adopt the disclosure requirements that you saw in the Keep Call Centers in America Act, where a customer would be informed that they've been routed to an offshore center, and they have the option to transfer that they've been told that. They also want to impose reporting and accountability, national security safeguards, data protection standards, and broadband label disclosure. So right now, broadband providers have to provide, it almost looks like what you see on your food, your nutrition chart. It's similar to that to allow consumers to have comparative advertising. And there's a section there that talks about how to contact the provider. And so they may impose a requirement that says, the percentage of calls that go offshore. So this would be the first one. And really what this would be is they're asking, how can we test language proficiency? So they're proposing, let's require the agents to take tests. Let's have them demonstrate grammar, tone, idioms, and cultural context proficiency for their customer service role. And I guess I'd throw this out to you so it could be a bit interactive, and maybe you could think about some of the operational challenges that might be of concern for you. But some of the ones that I identified is that it would definitely create staffing shortages potentially. It may increase the costs of how much you have to pay, capacity issues. They're also asking that quality control or quality assurance be carefully monitored. And they're asking a lot of questions about that. So should quality assurance have to measure clarity, comprehension, conversational effectiveness? Should you be tracking your complaints? And then also it would require a lot of training, and potentially you'd have to have increased domestic staffing to maintain service levels. So I'm going to pause. I don't know if anyone has any observations on this one. Another one is customer disclosure and transfer rates. So really what that is if I call and I'm routed to a foreign location, they're asking if they should have the agent disclose their location, meaning the country they're in. So, for example, if I'm answering it, it would be, I'm Susan. This call is in France. If you would like to be transferred to a U.S. representative, you have that right. And that would be somewhat of the disclosure they're proposing. And so they're asking questions about how will this increase costs, and how will it, what will you have to do as an industry to update your IVR messages, your agent scripting, your routing systems. You're going to have to think about handling increased transfer volumes. And then also just coaching your agents on understanding the process of having to give this required disclosure.
Susan, I think you got muted. Ah, I went back.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah, the slides are there. There, and now the audio is great.
Okay, sorry, I don't know where we left off. I had asked if anyone had any observations, so I don't know if you got muted after that.
Uh, there's a couple of questions in the chat, so I think we'll take some of those and
Okay,
um,
great.
then
I'm
we can
not
move.
able to see them, so if you
Yeah,
wanted to let me know, that'd be
yeah,
great.
absolutely.
Okay.
Lisa asked, does this apply to call centers above a threshold number of seats?
No, they haven't actually proposed that yet. There is calls for it to have more carve outs and more specificity, but they haven't. They have not put that in their proposals yet. That's a good question.
Yeah, thank you. And Jill added, are they doing any research to see if companies are already doing this? Many of the things that you're citing, quality control, language, proficiency, grammar, spelling tests, AI enhancements are already being done. And yes, Karen said absolutely they're being done today, which we know for sure a lot of them are, but um, any research on companies
So
doing it?
I think the key to understanding this is somewhat of their research. Sometimes what the FCC will do is issue a notice of inquiry. So they'll ask, they'll put that out to ask for more information from industry and others about what their practices are. And um, this proceeding is in a couple of what they call dockets, so numbers to help track each issue. And there have been some industry filings on that already. And some are saying this really should have been a notice of inquiry because the FCC does not have enough information to make these rules yet. So I guess one of the things I would encourage you to think about, or encourage your companies to think about, is whether or not to participate and to comment in this proceeding. There is information in there that I would think that you would want to weigh in on. They are asking for that type of information. They are asking to see what industry is already doing and the burdens that this might impose on industry. So it's something to think about. And I'll get into that in a little bit.
All right, thanks. There's no other questions right now, so we can keep going.
Okay. So again, this one is just thinking about the operational impacts of having to transfer, and it may be that you've already thought through these issues. It just seems a bit burdensome. So another thing that they're contemplating is restricting high risk transactions to domestic teams. So what does that mean? Really what they're getting at is sensitive data. The DOJ has a bulk transfer rule for sensitive data that's in place now. And they're pointing to that and saying, what else should we be doing to protect national security and individual privacy? And they're saying that perhaps some things should not be handled overseas. So should things that involve a credit card or a social security number or anything that would be considered more of sensitive information, should that be handled overseas? So they may try to impose rules that make that domestic only. So in the middle of the call, if you wanted to take payment, you'd have to route it back. So that's something to think about. And while you have the offshore agent trying to handle it, they'd still have to transfer it to the United States to finish the call. And again, these could create a lot of different potential issues. These are just examples that I've identified here. The other thing that they're proposing is whether or not they should put caps. And so they're saying, should we adopt a percentage threshold that says you have to send 30%, you can only send 30% offshore, and the rest have to come to inshore locations. That's one of the things that they're looking at. For things like that, you'd have to look at different technical solutions for routing to make sure it's balanced, both inbound and outbound calling. You'd have to make sure you've got the domestic centers staffed, I mentioned before. And then you just need to make sure that it's adequately documented. So if you were checked on compliance, you'd have a really rational way of describing why you've chosen to do it and how you're meeting the requirement.
Real quick, Susan, there is another question in the chat. Lisa asked, she said, I believe a similar bill was proposed in 2019 but failed to pass Congress. And what is the likelihood it will pass today? And does it have bipartisan support? Have we got that far?
I don't know that it has. It probably does have some support, but it seems like it may be just more on one side of the aisle than the other. And there is a big push, at least at the FCC, to think about and be mindful of jobs in the United States. I don't know how much traction it's getting in Congress. This is getting a lot of attention, sort of not just from telecom providers, but from others at the FCC. So I'll be curious to see how it nets out. And I'm continuing to monitor the legislation, so I'm happy to update this group.
Yeah, that would be great.
So some of the other things that they're proposing is reporting. You would have to report metrics in about where calls were routed. They're even looking at making it monthly or annually, or perhaps quarterly. They haven't decided the frequency. And they are asking if it needs to be broken out into granular details, such as your location of the calls and things like that. So it definitely imposed different burdens on you, and it would impose a reporting obligation if these rules pass. I think this one is probably one of the most notable ones for me, is whether or not the FCC is asking if it can restrict the countries that it permits companies to have offshore centers. So, in other words, they may be looking at countries that would be on other lists that we don't do business with, or things of that nature, or other prohibitions, just to say maybe we can't even have any call centers or calls being routed to those countries. And so that one is very interesting to me. And then it's also just looking at other locations and trying to figure out if this is something that they can extend more broadly if they have that reach. So you may be curious as to what the FCC is saying. They're saying in this proceeding that they're not just going to be focusing on traditional telecommunications carriers, but they're looking, as I mentioned earlier, for any entity that's involved in customer service, whether or not you're a carrier, or if you're targeting control points such as US telephone numbers. So the FCC is saying that it has justification for this, basing it on its Communications Act, which is the law that governs the FCC. And it's saying that the provider's practices are in connection with communication services and they must be just and reasonable. And that customer service interactions like billing, account access, support must all be just and reasonable across the board. They're also saying that they have authority to regulate how customer information is handled. And they're citing recent court decisions that say that this has reached beyond traditional categories. So at the FCC today, they have authority to regulate what's called customer proprietary network information, or CPNI. And that is sort of the extent of the information that they have jurisdiction over. But now they're saying that they have a broader reach. So again, that's something I'm not exactly sure if that would be upheld, but they are asking for some comments on their legal authority. And then they're saying that some of their proposals are justified based on the trends and the things that we're seeing in the national security space, including the DOJ's bulk transfer laws. And then really what they're hanging their hat on is their Telephone Communication Protection Act, so the TCPA authority, and saying that they have the ability to regulate texts that originate from outside of the United States, and that they have the ability to impose procedural standards and holding businesses liable for offshore practices. So I think these proposals really do have implications. They're asking if their rules can reach beyond what they're typically able to regulate. There's obviously going to be a lot of operational impacts here, compliance burdens, including reporting, disclosure, training, and data protection obligations, and then just evolving customer expectations. So the more customers that hear about this, the more they might think it is actually a rule and may start asking for these types of transfers. So we're already seeing industry filing comments in this proceeding. And right now, industry, which I'm sure many of you do, supports the FCC's goals of improving customer service and protecting customers and reducing fraud. But they've said to the FCC, like I mentioned earlier, that you need more information. It's premature to implement rules. Not all offshore operations are low quality or insecure. And that one of the points that I've been seeing in a lot of the filings is this increased obligation to have these calls routed domestically might actually result in more automation and not necessarily create US jobs. The FCC does mention AI technologies and how it may help, but it doesn't really actually address the question of how AI agents, their role in handling customer service calls. So I think that's a gap. They're also saying that these rules that are designed to protect consumers are also likely to create consumer harm. So I'm sure this is top of mind for all of you, is that it will likely increase call handle time if you have to add to your disclosures. It may create frustration for customers who are transferred and have to wait long times. You may not be able to resolve them on the first hit, especially if they have to be transferred to make a payment. And it just can result in very fragmented implementation and interactions. The other thing that they've honed in on is whether or not it's a misclassification risk. So they're saying that what they mean by this is the FCC is really thinking about outbound and inbound as all telemarketing type calls and scams. But that's not really what it is. Inbound client-directed services like retail support, telephone answering services, and emergency and medical lines don't fall into this. And so they're asking for the FCC to acknowledge the difference. So I was talking about this earlier. Comments are due May 26th. So at the end of this month, the initial set of comments are due. And then after that, another 30 days, reply comments are due. So sometimes folks will wait for the initial comments to be filed and they'll see what different industry groups are saying or other companies, and then they'll submit reply comments to try to bolster those arguments or to support them. So it may be something worth thinking about, especially as they sort of try to broaden their reach. If you want to weigh in on this and correct the data with the FCC, tell them about why rules are not necessarily needed because there's already best practices in place in the industry, and what you're doing to ensure that. And even perhaps how some technological solutions are helping to address these things. Another thing that you may start considering thinking about is what do you consider to be sensitive in your organization? Some regulated industries have very specific rules around password resets or making payment changes. It'd be just good to sort of take stock of what sensitive information you might be handling during these calls, even if there are no rules passed. So it'd be a nice exercise for you to at least know these things also for state privacy laws, and then just trying to ensure that those things are managed and that you have robust protections around them. I'm sure most of the companies that you are coming from probably have really robust practices. And just try to think about maybe who's handling these transactions, and where they should be handled, and if you need special access controls. I think for me, one of the biggest things here is looking at your outsourcing relationships and your agreements. I don't know if you've contemplated regulatory changes in your agreements, but it may be something to flag and think about. Whether or not you have audit rates or data security obligations, if things should go wrong, or if a regulator would try to enforce because of something that's being done through a call center. You may also want to look at your indemnification provisions that goes to that concept, and then also your termination rights. And then one other thing, maybe just to try to think about the metrics you have today and whether or not they align at all with the FCC's proposal. So if for some reason these were to become rules and you were to have to report on your different metrics, maybe worth thinking about what you define as transfers or escalations, domestic versus foreign routing, handling, and how you'd be able to report that. They are asking for the ways that would be easiest for industry to report, whether they should file. They even asked if it'd be in Excel. So again, these rules are not in place. It's just something that the FCC is considering. It's always good to review your operations with a lens as to how these rules might impact you. And proactive preparation and planning can help you reduce future disruptions should these rules come into play. So, we sped through that, so I don't know if there's questions.
There aren't any in the chat, but I think now is a good time for anyone who wants to just talk, come off mute. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you very much. I had heard about this a few months ago on a webinar presented by another organization. But can you refresh my memory on what the exact definition of offshoring is? So I'll just use my company as an example. So we have a call center based in the US that handles calls from customers who live in the US and Canada. Mm-hmm. So for those Canadian customers, is our US center considered offshore? Or are we using the classic definition of offshore? I'm sending the calls right to India or the Philippines or Jamaica or whatever.
The FCC hasn't gotten that granular into definitions, but it has made it very clear that it would be any routing from the United States to an outside country. So what your example of a standard definition would be, it wouldn't be Canada to the US, if that makes sense, or the US to Canada.
So it's only if we're sending them outside the US.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I also believe that for companies, and if the bill should pass and companies are in a non-compliant status with the requirements of the bill, that they would then be placed on some government list that potentially would preclude the company from eligibility for any kind of federal funding or grants. Is that still a part of this version of the bill?
So the legislation might have that. The FCC is also talking about the consequences for providers in this space. So you're correct that they may impose bonding requirements, or they may take companies and sanction them and not allow the calls to flow. There's some suggestion too that they may require those folks that are on the robocall mitigation database list that would run afoul. What happens if you're taken out of that database is that your calls are no longer allowed to go through, and other what they call downstream providers have to block you. So those are the things that they are looking at.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hey, Susan. Karen Vaughn here. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Really well organized and easy to understand. You had mentioned us commenting on our perspective or point of view or challenges. How do we go about doing that?
So I think it's probably worth a discussion with your legal departments and your government affairs departments. Certainly, outside counsel can always help you. I can help you, but you also, some companies are just filing themselves in the proceeding. The FCC has its own website, and it has electronic filing, has different numbers for this proceeding that you would write your comments and then file them. So, again, it's something we will be following. We will read the initial comments and probably put together some sort of summary of it. So we're always happy to help, but your legal department may have that teed up. But I do think it's something to consider.
Thank you.
Sure. It does seem like there's a lot of misinformation and outdated information just based on my own knowledge. So I hope industry comments on it. Well, that's all I have. I don't know if there's anything else that I could send you or that would be helpful, but I'm happy to do that. It's a pretty straightforward document in what it's asking.
Beth is asking if we'll share the deck.
Yes, I'd be happy to share the deck.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions? Anything while you have Susan? It could be related to this, or anything maybe that you thought of that connects to this. It's good to have someone like Susan to be able to talk with. So we have a few minutes if you wanted to do that.
I do have one other question. So
yeah.
If the bill should pass, typically what is the time period for companies to comply?
So a lot of times they'll give you an implementation deadline, so 6 months, or some rules will have longer implementation based on what industry said would be hard to implement or not. I would imagine that these set of rules, what would happen is they can be challenged in court. I imagine that they would be challenged. So I don't know if that would impact the implementation deadlines. But again, the rules haven't come out right now. The comments are due in the middle of June, and it's unclear as to how long it would take the FCC to even come out with what would be called a report and order, which would then outline the rules that it's proposing and what would be required. So I definitely think there's going to be a lot of story around this one. It's probably one that's, at least I think, will be very interesting to follow. So
Yeah, that's perfect. The Amber just said, what's the best way to follow this bill and receive updated information? So I think that on the FCC website, there's information on that. And maybe we could share that link also when we share the presentation.
yeah, sure. And we will be sending out advisories. So please let us know if you're interested. We can give you the link to sign up for those.
I started thinking about this after we were talking on Monday, and I think about the both sides from being a brand, being coming from the contact center world, and they don't have a definition, like you said, of what offshore means. And I was thinking about ultimately how that will follow an agent, right? Because it's like if it's an agent's location, is that
Yeah.
going to be different from an agent working in a contact center in Manila versus working remote at home in Manila? Like what that's
Yeah.
gonna do with our current workforce and strategy, like our workforce strategy. So
Yeah,
just
no, that's a really good point. I mean, I worked from overseas when my husband and I lived over there, but it was considered a U.S. household. So the analysis was I was in the U.S., I was dialing into the U.S. So again, that is a really important question. Sure, people will be asking.
yeah.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, Scott, for sure. We will make that recording available. The SOCAP team will get working on that, and Susan will share her resources. And thank you so much, Susan, for taking time out of your day,
Yeah.
and for all of you for being here and sharing wonderful questions. And
Thank you for coming. I always love presenting to you all. You're such a nice audience. So thank you.
Great job, Susan.
Okay, thank you.
thanks,
Good to
everyone.
see
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.